and of Microsoft.
Whoa.
The incremental revenue that all of those guys are growing, Apple actually beats.
On a percentage basis or dollar basis?
No, in dollar terms.
Wow.
Absolutely.
In dollar terms.
Wow.
What was the figure?
I think it was almost 30 billion. So they'll grow almost 30 billion this year. So what's equally interesting, Alex, you and I have been talking a lot about innovation. What's equally interesting is half of that growth is coming from the iPhone. The other quarter of that is coming from the iPad. Then you've got another 15% coming from the notebook, which MacBook came out in mid-2006. So if you look at it, all of that growth is coming from products introduced basically in the last 4 or 5 years. And of course, that's the problem with all those other companies. They're not coming out with products like that. So what was the news this week of Microsoft? And the Microsoft Apple thing is always funny. The big news that I saw was Steve Ballmer selling 50 million shares of Microsoft stock.
Yeah, but don't you think if he keeps it and then leaves, the value would go up?
It might. Yeah, it might.
But he bought Apple stock, right?
Yeah. What's that?
He bought Apple stock.
Yeah, invested it in Apple. That would be awesome. I've been talking about this for a few months, but there is this underlying anxiety, this really exciting sentiment that I'm starting to feel in Silicon Valley and down here, mainly because of the IPO window open, which always drives a whole lot of excitement in funding new businesses. So there's a company, Pandora, you all know Pandora, right? #1 music app download on the iPhone. I was reading about the history of Pandora. I think it should, if there was a kind of entrepreneurs of the decade, Pandora should be at least in the top 3 or 4. This company launched in March 2000. Now, I was 100% exposed to consumer internet in March 2000. And I can tell you that was a shitty time to be investing, a shitty time of launching a company. So launched in March 2000. By 2004, early 2004, none of the employees had taken a salary for 2.5 years.
Wow.
A lot of the employees were on, as one guy says, I was on my 12th credit card, having maxed out my 12th credit card. They had made, at that point, they were counting. After they got like up to 300, they thought, wow, how far will this go? They got to 348 investor pitches. And then in March, or in April of 2004, they got $5 million.
Wait, you're saying none of the 348 raised any money?
No, they pitched 347 investors who said no over that 3 years. Finally, the 348. I mean, taking that many negative, I have entrepreneurs who kind of start to crumble after their 10th pitch. 348 pitches.
They got no money all the way along?
What's that?
They got no money all the way along?
No money. They had some money from March 2000, and then they basically ran out of money. But it's a good question. So how did they stay in business? The CEO said, we discovered kind of an interesting methodology. He said, it turns out if you don't pay any of your employees, your overhead is very low. So for 2.5 years, these guys didn't pay their employees. By the way, if there's any labor lawyers in the room, I'm sure they were breaking a lot of laws. But, I mean, and he was so serious when he said this last comment. He said,
You've made Wayne Boss entirely too happy.
They were down to $25,000 bucks. Wow. And this is in like late '03. And the management team got in a room, and they were trying to come up with ideas. And the best idea was, we're going to Reno, and we're going to put this money on black. And they're like, when they were debating the stats, they're like, look at how many VC pitches have we made? There's like a 0.00% chance. There is like a 48% chance. With this money, we'll come back.
The guy who did phone.com, Alain, actually did that, and because he was in the same position.
Well, so when you have a team like that, you just want them to succeed. So he was talking about that because they recently raised like $40 or $50 million. They're starting to hire bankers to go public. And the stats are really interesting. 30 million subscribers like 18 months ago, 80 million today. Those aren't all paying. But
by the way, good lead-in because Tim, the CEO, is going to be speaking here at the end of May.
oh, awesome.
So that's good.
Lastly, I talked about how exciting everything is, and having been at Idea Lab and then lived through the whole internet bubble and all that, I've got a sixth sense for like bubbly type of phenomenon. So, early in the internet days, it was the cappuccino bar. You remember those, right? To hire employees. Then it was bring your dog to work. So I was seeing a company called Kabam. Anybody know them? Really fast-growing gaming company. By the way, they were at 20 employees a year ago. They finished this year at 200 employees, and they're hiring 500 this year. So having to hire a lot of people in a very competitive market. But so their thing I love. This is sort of like Valley-esque. They've got a trust-based vacation policy. And I thought, you know what, that's going to go completely haywire, because at the end of the day, people aren't going to actually report how many days they're taking off. But that's this year's version of the cappuccino bar, and a good sign that we're heading towards good times, at least in the IPO market and the startup market. Last thing here, Ken. Let's see. There's a company called Kinder Morgan. We wouldn't normally talk about that. They're a pipe company. They make pipes for gas, oil and gas distribution. They're going public. The only reason I mention them here is, one, they're raising more money than ever been raised in an IPO for a buyout fund, for a leveraged buyout IPO. Now think about it. 2 years ago, there was no IPO market there. Everything was going to hell. The buyout funds were saying they're not sure they're ever going to get a return. Now you've got the biggest buyout IPO coming down. I also love this little nugget.
Can I just say one thing about that company? I think it has the highest revenue per employee in the world, $6 million per person.
Whoa.
Wow.
Well, that's it. I don't know if everybody heard that, but highest revenue per employee in the world, according to Alex.
Every single employee is a $6 million man.
Yeah, because they're like about a 20 billion revenue rate. But one of the reasons I love this is, I've got a life philosophy for some of you who know me, which is in almost every case, there's a few rare exceptions, but in almost every case, what we think is bad news on a given day might actually turn out to be great news. And you only know after the fact. And being an early stage venture capitalist, I have to think that way, because you always hear bad news. And then we lost this great deal. Well, it turns out that great deal would have been a shitty deal. But I noted that this guy who's becoming a billionaire, Richard Kinder, who's founder of Kinder Morgan, he was fired from his job at Enron and left and was sad and depressed, didn't have anything else to do, so bought a bunch of pipes and created a gas pipeline, and now he's a billionaire. Yeah. That's what I heard. He bought a pipeline.
Back to basics. It took a company that they made money with before Enron went off to its own little venture with scaling and everything. So really, he owns the pipeline business. They produce gas.
Yeah.
Well, it's worth pointing out too that
to the western coast to China.
it's worth pointing out in the United States, over the next 20 years, we're going to go from about 20% gas to 40% gas as the basis for our energy. So there are very few 20-year bets you can make in the world that are as secure as building gas pipelines.
I suppose that's why they're able to go out right now. Goldman Sachs, Carlyle Group, they're all cashing out of this. Also, one last little tidbit. Venture capitalists always raise money if they can in IPOs. But one thing to remember is, if you take all the capital that venture-backed companies raise when they go public, it's actually fairly small. I'm guessing that in the last 5 or 6 years, the combined amount of proceeds from venture capital-backed IPOs is probably under $6 or $7 billion. That may seem like a lot, but it's really not. I added it up. The 3 leveraged buyout IPOs going public in the next month are going to raise $14 billion of new capital. And the reason I find that actually interesting and sort of exciting for venture capitalists and for startups is, I bet you the $6 or $8 billion that our companies took is going to produce a lot more long-term value than that $14 billion that those buyout shops took in to basically recap old businesses.
To put it in perspective, that the countries in the GCC, which have 40 million people, take that in every 15 days in oil revenues.
All right, guys, on to
Thank you,
Joe.
William Quigley.
All right.